they did it. After all the waiting, all the longing looks, all the almost moments, all the heartbreak and the hope, Benedict, Bridgerton, and Sophie Beckett finally got their ending. And not just any ending. The kind of ending that makes you pause the screen, put your hand over your mouth, and just sit there for a second because you cannot believe what you just watched. Episode 8 of Bridgerton Season 4 did not come to play. It came to win. And if you are someone who has been riding with Benophie since the very first episode of this season, then you already know that this finale paid off every single second of that wait. But if you think you already know everything that happened, stay right here, because we are going to break down every moment, every scene, every look, every word that made this episode one of the greatest romance finales this show has ever produced. This is not just a reaction. This is a celebration. Asterisk, there is something special about the way Bridgerton ends its seasons. Every single time, the show finds a way to pull you into a world that feels warm and beautiful and real, even when it is set to 100 years in the past. But Season 4 did something that the previous seasons did not fully manage to do. It made you feel like the love story you were watching actually mattered beyond the grand gestures and the pretty dresses. It made you feel like these two people, Benedict and Sophie, were fighting for something real. And episode 8 was the moment that fight finally came to an end. The episode opens and you can already tell from the very first frame that this is different. The tone is quieter than what we have seen in the last few episodes. There is no chaos, no misunderstanding pulling the two leads apart, no outside force creating drama for the sake of drama. Instead, the show gives you something rare. It gives you to people who are simply trying to find their way back to each other. And it trusts the audience to feel the weight of that without spelling it out. The music in this opening sequence does a lot of heavy lifting, and honestly, it deserves its own conversation. It is soft, but it is not weak. It carries this sense of something coming to a close, like the last few pages of a book you have been reading for months, and you are not ready for it to end, but you also cannot wait to see how it finishes. That is the exact feeling the score gives you in those first few minutes. And it sets the tone for everything that follows. Now, before we get into the full breakdown of every major Benophie moment in this episode, let us just take a second to appreciate what this opening scene is actually doing on a storytelling level. Because the writers are not wasting a single frame here. Every shot, every line of dialogue, every costume choice is doing something. Sophie appears on screen and she looks different from how we have seen her before. Not because of the clothes or the hair, although those details are also doing a lot of work. She looks different because she carries herself differently. There is a stillness to her in this opening that tells you she has made a decision. She knows what she wants. She is done running from it. And that shift in her character, that quiet confidence, is something that has been built over the entire season, and it finally lands here in this first scene of the finale in a way that feels completely earned. Benedict, on the other hand, comes into this opening scene carrying everything on his face. That has always been one of the most interesting things about his character this season. He is not a man who hides his feelings well, but he has spent most of the season trying to anyway. And in episode 8, that wall is already starting to come down before the story even puts the two of them in the same room together. You watch him and you can see that he is tired of pretending. He is tired of acting like he does not know exactly what he wants. And what he wants is Sophie. It has always been Sophie. That is what makes this cold open so effective. By the time the title card drops, you are not just watching two characters move through a plot. You are watching two people who love each other finally stop getting in their own way. And the show frames that so beautifully that even if you had never seen a single episode of Bridgerton before, you would still feel the pull of it. Asterisk, nobody falls in love in a straight line. And if there is one couple in the entire Bridgerton universe that proves that point better than anyone else, it is Benedict and Sophie. Because their road to this finale was not just bumpy. It was the kind of road that makes you pull over, question your entire journey, and wonder if the destination was ever actually real. But that is exactly why episode 8 hits the way it does. You cannot understand how good the landing feels until you understand how long and how painful the flight was. So let us go back for a second. Not too far, just far enough to remind you what was at stake walking into this finale. Season 4 introduced us to a Benedict Bridgerton who was lost. Not in a dramatic, falling apart kind of way, but lost in that quiet and comfortable way that is actually harder to watch. He was a man who had everything on the outside and felt nothing on the inside. The art, the freedom, the charm, all of it was there. But there was no direction, no purpose, no person who made him feel like the version of himself he actually wanted to be. He was coasting. And the show was very honest about that from the very beginning of the season. It did not try to make him look cool while he was lost. It just showed you a man who had not yet found his reason to stop wandering. Then came Sophie. And the thing about Sophie is that she did not walk into Benedict's life like a solution to his problems. That would have been the lazy version of this story. Instead, she walked in as someone who had her own battles, her own history, her own reasons to keep people at a distance. She was not there to fix him. She was just there, fully and completely herself. And that was the thing that changed everything for him. Because Benedict had been surrounded by people his whole life, and Sophie was the first person who made him feel like he was actually seen. But the season did not let that connection breathe easily. Every time these two got close, something got in the way. And not always something external. Sometimes the obstacle was Benedict himself, his fear of what it would mean to truly choose someone, to give up the idea of endless possibility for one real and certain thing. And sometimes the obstacle was Sophie, her own fear of trusting something that felt too good, too warm, too safe when her whole life had taught her that safety was never guaranteed. By the time episode 7 ended, both of them had been pushed to their absolute limit. The misunderstanding that closed out that episode was not just a plot device. It was the final test of whether these two people were going to choose each other or walk away. And the way episode 7 left things hanging was genuinely cruel in the best possible way. Because you knew, you felt it in your gut. That episode 8 was either going to break your heart completely or give you everything you had been waiting for since the very first episode of the season. And that is the weight that episode 8 carries before a single new scene even begins. It is not just a finale. It is the answer to a question the whole season has been asking. Can two people who are both running from something stop long enough to run toward each other instead? That is the question. And episode 8 is the answer. And what an answer it turns out to be. Asterisk, you know that feeling when a show you loved is something so right that you forget you are just sitting on your couch watching a screen. That feeling where the line between you and the story completely disappears and for a few minutes you are not a viewer anymore. You are just a person feeling things you did not plan to feel. That is what the opening scene of episode 8 does. It does not ease you in. It does not warm up slowly. It grabs you by the collar from the very first frame and it does not let go. The episode opens on Sophie, not Benedict, Sophie, and that choice alone tells you everything about how the writers wanted this finale to feel. Because all season long, so much of the emotional focus has been filtered through Benedict's perspective. His confusion, his longing, his internal war between freedom and commitment. And now, in the final episode, the camera leads with her. It says, without a single word of dialogue, that this story belongs to both of them equally. And honestly, that felt like a quiet apology and a loud promise at the same time. Sophie is standing in a room that feels both familiar and different. The lighting is soft, but not dreamy. It feels lived in, real, like a moment that is actually happening rather than a moment being performed for an audience. She is not crying. She is not smiling. She is just present. And there is something about that stillness that hits harder than any dramatic expression could. Because you have watched this woman hold herself together through an entire season of chaos and uncertainty. And here in the opening seconds of the finale, she is finally just allowed to exist without bracing for something to go wrong. Then the camera moves and you see what she is looking at. And this is the moment. This is where the episode makes its first real move. Because what Sophie is looking at is not a letter, not a gift, not some grand gesture that Benedict has sent to win her back. She is looking at something small, something personal, something that could only mean something if you had been paying attention to who these two people actually are beneath all the tension and the longing, and that detail. That tiny deliberate detail cracked something open in the chest before the scene had even properly begun. This is what separates a good romance from a great one. Great romance does not lead with the big moments. It leads with the small ones. It trusts that the audience has been paying attention. It trusts that a single object in a single frame can carry the weight of an entire relationship without anyone having to explain it out loud. And Bridgerton season for episode 8 opens with exactly that kind of trust. It respects your intelligence as a viewer and rewards your investment as a fan. Benedict enters the scene about to end a half minutes in, and the energy shifts immediately. Not in a dramatic way. Not with swelling music or a slow motion walk or any of the usual tricks a lesser show would reach for. He just walks in and the air in the scene changes. That is the chemistry these two actors have built over the course of this entire season, and it lands here in a way that feels completely natural. He sees her and he stops. Not a dramatic stop, just a real one. The kind of stop that a person makes when they walk into a room and find exactly the person they were hoping would be there but were not sure would be. What follows in the next few minutes of this opening scene is some of the best dialogue the show has written across all 4 seasons. And again, it is not big sweeping declarations. It is two people talking to each other like people actually talk. There are pauses. There are half-finished sentences. There are moments where one of them says something and the other one just looks at them because words are not enough and they both mow it. The writing in this scene understands that real intimacy is not about finding the perfect thing to say. It is about being willing to stay in the room even when you do not have the perfect thing to say. By the time this opening scene closes out and the story moves forward into the rest of the episode, you are already fully gone, already completely invested, already dreading the end credits because you do not want this to be over. And that is the mark of a first impression done exactly right. It does not just set up what is coming. It makes you feel like what is coming is going to matter. And in the case of episode 8, that feeling turns out to be completely correct. This is the part of the episode that fans are going to be talking about for a very long time. Not just this week, not just this month, but years from now when someone asks, what was the greatest romance payoff in Bridgerton history? People are going to come back to this. They are going to come back to what episode 8 did in its second half, and they are going to say, that was the moment this show proved it understood what love actually looks like when it is written with honesty and care and real intention. Because everything in this climax, every scene, every conversation, every look that passes between Benedict and Sophie feels like it was built from the ground up with one single purpose. To make you feel the full weight of what these two people have been carrying all season and to finally let them put it down. The first major scene in this climax begins with a confrontation. And before you picture something loud and dramatic, let me stop you right there because this is not that kind of confrontation. There is no shouting. There are no accusations flying back and forth. It is quieter than that, and because of that, it is so much harder to watch. Benedict comes to Sophie not with a speech prepared, not with a plan. He comes to her with nothing but honesty, and that is the most vulnerable we have seen him in the entire season. He stands in front of her and he does not try to be charming or clever or any of the things he usually hides behind. He just tells her the truth. He tells her that he is scared, that he has always been scared, that the fear was never about her, it was about him. About what it means to stop being someone who keeps all his options open and start being someone who chooses one thing completely and without any guarantee of how it ends. And Sophie listens. She does not interrupt. She does not fill the silence with reassurance before he is finished. She just listens. And when he is done, she does not tell him that everything is going to be fine. She does not rush to make him feel better. Instead, she tells him her own truth. She tells him that she knows what it is to be afraid of something real, that she has spent her whole life protecting herself from things that felt too good because everything that ever felt too good eventually got taken away. And she tells him that she is tired of protecting herself from him specifically. Because protecting yourself from someone you love is just another word for being alone, and she is done being alone. That exchange between them is the emotional core of the entire season. Everything, every scene, every argument, every stolen glance, every almost moment has been building to those two people standing in that room and finally saying out loud what they have been carrying in silence. And the show handles it with such restraint and such confidence that you feel every single word land without the script ever having to underline it for you. Then the scene shifts, and this is where the episode moves from emotional to cinematic. Because after that conversation, the show does something genuinely bold. It slows down at a point in a finale where most shows would be rushing toward the resolution. Bridgerton season 4 episode 8 deliberately pulls back the pace and gives you a long, quiet, beautiful sequence of Benedict and Sophie simply being together. No crisis, no interruption, no last-minute obstacle. Just two people in the same space, finally on the same side, and the camera just watches them like it cannot look away. Like it has been waiting all season for this exact moment just as much as the audience has. The detail in this sequence is extraordinary. The way they move around each other. The way Benedict reaches for Sophie's hand not as a grand gesture but just as a natural thing, like reaching for something that has always belonged there. The way Sophie leans into him not with relief but with ease, like this is not a new feeling but a familiar one that she is finally allowing herself to have. These are not two people falling in love in this moment. These are two people recognizing a love that was already there and choosing to stop pretending it was not died. And then comes the scene that the entire fandom is going to be clipping and rewatching and posting everywhere for the next several months. The proposal scene. Now I want to be very deliberate about how I talk about this because I think it is important to understand what makes this proposal different from every other proposal this show has ever done. It is not the setting. It is not the words Benedict uses, although the words are genuinely beautiful. It is the fact that Sophie proposes right back. Not in a joking way, not as a reaction, but as her own independent declaration. She does not wait to receive the love. She meets it. She walks toward it with the same energy it is being offered, and she claims it is something that belongs to her just as much as it belongs to him. And in that moment, Sophie Beckett becomes one of the most fully realized romantic leads this show has ever given us. The episode closes out the Benophie storyline with a final scene that is simple and warm and exactly right. There is no grand backdrop. There is no audience of characters watching and applauding. It is just the two of them together in a quiet moment that feels like the beginning of something rather than the end. And that choice to close their story not with a bang but with a breath is the final proof that the writers understood these characters deeply and respected what their love story was actually about. Benophie does not reign supreme because their love story was the loudest or the most dramatic. They reign supreme because it was the most honest. And episode 8 delivered that honesty in every single frame of this climax. Every scene, every word, every look. This was Bridgerton at its absolute best, and it is going to be a very long time before this show tops what it did here.